Welcome to the Founders Odyssey podcast, where we educate, inspire, and create a supportive community for you founders out there. Today, we are joined with the man, the myth, the legend, Timothy Paulson. Timothy is an author, international speaker, and million-dollar artist. His immense passion for connectivity and creativity has taken him around the world and has placed him in rooms with the highest powered, most intelligent people on the planet. His desire to ignite change and help others find their true passion in life is his largest mission. We welcome the one and only Timothy Paulson to the show today. Great to have you. How you doing?
Nathan, it's so good to be with you. I should read your introduction because you are such an impressive, wonderful young entrepreneur. I've known you now for, I guess it's going on about a year. You and Lacey just doing remarkable things. So I'm delighted to join you today. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I know they call you the hype man as well, but I'm very excited to get to know you personally a little bit better, and to share with our audience a little bit about what you do, who you are, and where you're going, because I know it's past, present, and future that, these conversations can really have a lot of depth in them. So Let's cover on the past. And since this is a kind of an entrepreneurial podcast, let's cover over, what's interested you in the world of business, and then how that's translating into art, which we'll get to here in a second, because you're very, very good at that as well. So let's just let's go back to your past and how you got started.
Where did I come from? That's a good one. So I started back with a company called Hair Club for Men way back in the 80s. I was really young. And Hair Club for Men. Now, older people will remember the commercials. Cy Sperling, he would come on the commercial and he'd say at the end, "I'm not only the Hair Club president, I'm also a client." He would show his before picture, his bald picture, and then after picture. And I joined Hair Club for Men when the company was doing well, $8 million a year. But during the 9 years I was with the company, I became vice president. We took that to 120 million a year. And that was just a wonderful experience. It was you learn from mistakes, you learn from successes. But Cy Sperling was one of my best friends. He passed away a couple of years ago. But I left in 1995. I resigned in 1995 to start my own company because I love creativity. You mentioned that. Anything creative. You talk about fueling my fire, Nathan. You give me something creative. So that's revolved around helping companies, businesses with their marketing. Well, I love being creative with marketing and copywriting. But then it's evolved into being creative as an artist, as an author, as a speaker, as a consultant. So my company started in 1995, Prime Time Business Institute. And I had the opportunity of speaking, because I really kind of revolved around speaking. And so I spoke in Egypt and Australia and Europe and elsewhere. You mentioned some of that. But several years ago, I changed the name of my company to Paulson Creativity Studio, because it's like I wanted everyone in the world to know that this is about creativity. So, in recent years, writing books and doing a lot more in terms of art and taking and advancing that. Now, you and I, Nathan, we met through Joe Polish Genius Network. You're a member, and I've helped Joe for 20 years. He's been like my number one client for 20 years. We've worked together. So I've helped him with Genius Network and the 100K group and a bunch of other things. So I love that because Joe's heart is helping entrepreneurs, helping them overcome frustrations, helping them take their business to the next level, helping them achieve what they want to achieve in life with their business and personally. Joe talks about health, wealth, and ELF. And ELF is an acronym for easy, lucrative, and fun. That's what he wants to do. He wants to help you. So I've had the privilege of helping Joe through, again, a lot of creativity, marketing, copywriting, speaking, and so forth to kind of get to that level. So that's where I've come from. That kind of brings us to where we are today in brief.
Very exciting, my friend. I know you've got a lot of passion when you speak of creativity. let's pull a little bit more out of you along the lines of creativity and what sparked your mind of being creative. I mean, do you remember back as a young kid, or how did this all start?
Yeah, well, that's a good question because I'll show you a picture here. So my dad is a famous artist. Most people listening to this, watching this podcast, Nathan, um, they've seen my dad on TV since 1989. Gosh, my dad's been on TV teaching art. So you're changing channels and you come across this artist who's teaching and you watch for a minute. Now, I know what most of your listeners or those watching this interview are thinking. Bob Ross, the guy with the big, no, my dad is Buck Paulson, and he's the other guy that you've seen on TV for a lot of years. But I want to show you this painting. So this is, oh gosh, yeah, this is a painting my dad did of me. Sorry about that filter, but he did this painting of me. I was in the basement with him when he was just starting to paint. He started to learn how to paint when I was a baby. My dad was a professional full-time baseball player and in the minor leagues. And then he went to college and got a physical education, a degree. And then he became supervisor of the recreation department in Santa Barbara, California, total jock. But he got this desire to start painting out of nowhere. He was the least likely person you would say, this guy's going to become a famous artist. It just didn't make sense. But my dad started taking lessons from an old master artist named Claude Buck, 1962. And for 8 years, he studied with Claude Buck. And then my dad became a full-time professional artist. So I showed you this picture because that's me as a little boy painting with my dad. That, Nathan, is a good question. When did the creativity spark? It was early. Oh my goodness. I remember pulling out this old box of paints my dad gave me. It was a metal box, excuse me, with a bunch of mostly used art tubes, paint tubes and some brushes. And he gave it to me. And I remember pulling that out. I'm probably 6 years old. And getting a board. It was like an 8.5 by 11-inch board. And I painted a trophy. And I remember the feeling. It was like, oh my gosh, I love this. And I remember looking at the painting of the trophy that I did. And it was like, this isn't very good, but I love doing this. So I was raised with a paintbrush in my hand. And so the creativity manifested through art at a very early age. And then I don't know if that triggered all this other stuff, Nathan. Like, boy, I love you. If you say, hey, I want you to write a letter to announce an event, like you're having an event pretty soon, a couples retreat, right? I love writing copy for marketing of that type of thing. Oh my, it's like painting a picture for me. So it goes back. That's where, as you asked the question, that's where it started. That's where it manifested. That's where I recognized it. But I think it's been manifest throughout the years. So I think that it's kind of in my blood because of my father's creativity.
Yeah, I understand. That is good. That's really good to understand. I'm noticing a few things here, and this I think would be really helpful for our audience is, let's imagine we have a blank canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say a blank canvas is the business that you want to start,
Yep.
the piece of paper that you want to write the copy for of this perfect newsletter, right? So let's take a look at how the creative mind can then use this blank canvas, right? Because we've got founders out there that are like, they're looking at this white screen, right? Or a white canvas.
Uh-huh.
And I want to speak to them and I want you to help them understand that creativity is a tool. And I want you to speak to the fact that it's a tool that has helped you in your success in life, and how would it help them?
So a lot of people, I think, Nathan, would say, first of all, I love the analogy of a blank canvas because I think of a blank canvas on my easel and I get excited, like, oh my gosh, there's no limit. I can do it. I can do anything I want. And something I learned over the years is that canvases are completely forgiving. In other words, I can make a mistake on the canvas and I go back and correct it. I could actually start completely over again, right? So it's illustrative of just starting, just putting something on the canvas. I think to trigger creativity, you just have to start. We're afraid, I think, a lot of times of actually just starting, which I'll tell you a story about in just a second. But too often I believe, and I haven't done deep study on this, but just my experience over a lot of years, too many people say, I'm not creative. Oh, I could never do that. I'm just not a creative person. I would say baloney. Like my dad has been teaching art classes and workshops since 1970. And he has had individuals from all different backgrounds come to these classes, and they can become creative immediately. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had that much creativity in me. But maybe that doesn't translate over to business, they might say. Baloney. Baloney. The way that I trigger creativity, I'm going to come back and tell you a story in just a second, but the way that I trigger creativity is if I feel stuck, if I feel, boy, I'm not being creative, I write. This is actually a Genius. Oh, see, there's the filter again. Anyway, Genius Network book. But so you can't see this, but I just write. I start to write. If I'm feeling a lack of creativity, I just start writing. And then it's like, whoa, the creativity starts to flow. Now, that might be different for different people, but wow, the creativity flows, and then it triggers ideas. And then it's like, oh my goodness, I'm getting all sorts of ideas. I'm becoming creative. It's just starting, whether it's a painting, whether it's a marketing piece, whether it's putting together a speech, whether it's talking about hiring somebody or what I'm going to do with my business next or starting a new business. Oftentimes it's just starting. So here's a story I want to tell you real quickly, Nathan. So I was raised painting the way that my dad painted. He was taught the way that Claude Buck painted. Now, Claude Buck was a master artist. He was once recognized as one of the 100 greatest living American artists. You can Google him, Claude Buck, brilliant artist. And my dad was very fortunate because Claude Buck, at the age of 72, moved to Santa Barbara, California, where my dad had just moved to. So they met. Claude Buck was from New York, and then he taught at the Chicago Art Institute and so forth. But so anyway, Claude Buck taught or painted in the realism style. In other words, here's a tree. You paint so it looks like a tree, not abstract, right? Claude Buck painted an ocean so it looked like an ocean. A portrait so that it looked like the person, not this Picasso stuff where it's like cubism and it's like, what is that, right? Or not like Jackson Pollock, who drip painted, action painting, drip painting all over the canvas. Claude Buck was part of a group, I think this is kind of funny, that started, I think it was 1948. It was called Sanity in Art Society. And they came together. They had these different, in Boston, Chicago, and elsewhere, they had these different divisions. And it was like, we need to keep sanity in art. What's with this drip painting? What's with this abstract stuff? What is this? All of this stuff, right? So I share that because that's how I was raised. Okay, so my dad, I went to an art museum, which we did. I remember going to the art museum with my dad, and we're looking at a piece of modern art, some sort of abstract. And my dad, and I'm 8 years old, my dad said, Timmy, you could paint better than that. And I remember being offended, like, of course I can paint better than that. Why did you put it that way, Dad? Even you can paint better. But it was in a museum. So there were a lot of people who liked this, right? So anyway, with that preface, several years ago, I'm in my art studio, and I had been studying the art of Jackson Pollock and the life of Jackson Pollock. So Jackson Pollock, 1940s, he's on the cover of Life magazine. Is this the greatest American artist? It's drip painting. So a canvas on the floor, and he takes a stick and he dips it into a bucket of paint and he throws it out onto the canvas. One of his paintings, I think it was about 15 years ago, sold for, I think it was over $100 million. So he was popular then too. It's not like after he died, right? So I was studying about Jackson Pollock, and it was like, I want to do a painting like Jackson Pollock. And so I got a 5 foot by 5 foot piece of canvas. I put it on the floor of my studio, and I got these buckets of paint. So I had red, and I had blue, and I had yellow, and I had black. And I'm about to drip paint onto this canvas. And as strange and maybe ridiculous as it sounds, I couldn't do it. I was afraid to do it because I would be doing something that my dad was against, that Claude Buck was against, that I had been taught is the wrong way to paint. You can't do it that way. And it was probably 3 weeks before I got up the nerve and I started, and it was red paint. And I took the stick and I threw it out over the paint or on the canvas. And it was like I was released. It's hard to explain. And it might be a different experience for different people, but it was like, oh my gosh, the limits are now off. The limits are off. And then I added the yellow, and then I added the blue, and then I added the black. And it's a really cool painting. I call it Unlimited, because if I were speaking to myself, my young 20-year-old self, I would say, don't wait for permission. Don't ask for permission. Don't wait for someone to come along and say, okay, you have the permission to paint in this way, or you have permission to start a nonprofit organization, or you have permission to build a multi-million-dollar business. Don't wait for permission. Well, you don't have the education. Don't wait for permission. You don't have the experience. Don't wait for permission. What gives you the right to do? I don't want to wait for permission. And so that story of creating this piece of art, again called Unlimited, 5 foot by 5 foot, totally changed the way that I painted from then on. This was about 11, 12 years ago. I can paint in abstract. I can paint in any manner that I want, and I have. And it's like, wow, complete freedom to be totally creative. So when you're asking the question, so how can an individual become more creative, or how can they tap into that? It's like, man, give yourself permission. Don't wait for somebody to come along and say, well, I did a personality test on you and you rated really high in creativity. Oh, okay, I can be creative. Don't wait for it. Just claim it. Just say, man, I'm creative, and I'm going to go off and do this. I don't know, Nathan, if by being an artist that then made me creative and everything else, or I just came naturally creative or whatever. But what I do feel is, like, by being creative in art, I'm creative in writing. By being creative in writing, I'm creative in speaking, putting together a seminar or whatever it might be. By being creative in those areas, I can be creative in marketing and copywriting. So it kind of transcends. It's like you're creative, developing creativity. And really, I think most entrepreneurs, founders, if you look at it and you ask yourself, where in my life am I creative? And it might be, wow, I'm really creative in raising my kids. I'm really creative in my relationship with my spouse. I'm really creative in the service that I do in my church or whatever. And you say, well, I'm creative there. Great. Guess what? You're creative, and it can transcend and actually be applicable in other areas of your life.
And that was such a good story. And I certainly can resonate with the fact that there have been times in my life, and I know for a fact you out there have been times in your life where you've come to this precipice and you've got a fork in the road, and one one turn says fear and the other says go for it.
Yeah.
Let's speak to that precipice or the fork, Tim. And how do you get over the fear? And then how do you just begin? I know you've touched on just start, which is really good, and then also give yourself permission. But really, what if you give yourself permission and you're just blocked? So can you speak on that blockage and ways that you have gotten out of that?
So a couple of things come to mind. And so again, everything I do merges like art with an explanation. I in my most recent book, Totality X, it's a merging of art and theology. I merge art with business. I merge art with creativity. So I appreciate the question. Excuse me. So a couple of things come to mind. One is that it's about direction, not perfection. So I think that sometimes an individual will start down a path, Nathan, and it's like, okay, and it doesn't look so good. It doesn't look like the way that they want it. And so they stop and they're blocked. Maybe the creativity stops, there's momentum that stops. I'll tell you a quick story. This was from third grade. I was in third grade. Mr. Yoshida was my teacher, one of my favorite teachers of all time. McKinley Elementary School in Santa Barbara. And Mr. Yoshida says to the class one day, Timmy Paulson's dad is a full-time artist. My dad had just become a full-time artist, 1970. And he's coming to the school. He's going to do an art demonstration for the school. And I thought, oh my gosh, I am the cool kid in the school. And I was. Like the other students were saying, wow, Paulson, your dad is an artist. That's so cool. So we went to this big room and my dad was standing up front, and he sees me and says hello, but he's got this blank canvas, like you were describing earlier, blank canvas on an easel at the front of the room. And he had about an hour, as I recall. And my dad is engaging and he's, young and handsome and I'm proud. This is my dad. And oh my gosh, I'm the cool kid in school. And he's painting as he's talking, right? And halfway through, about 30 minutes into it, I got really, really nervous because it looked terrible. It was like this big dark blob on the canvas. And I remember so distinctly, I'll never forget it, that feeling of, man, I'm going to get harassed from the other students. They're going to make fun of me because my dad's not a good artist, they're going to say. But by the time my dad was done, it was a beautiful seascape, a beautiful dark seascape. And I love that story early in my life because I've come across some great quotes that are consistent with really the principle of that, the halfway principle, I call it in my book. But it's a couple quotes. One is Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss wrote, "Everything stinks until it's finished." Now think about that relative to your business or anything, raising kids. Sometimes it's a marriage. So that's something if you're doing a marriage retreat, sometimes a marriage halfway through. Rosabeth Cantor, she's a Harvard professor. Everything looks like a failure halfway through. And I've done pastoral counseling over the years, and I've counseled with couples. And it's like, we're going through a divorce. How long have you been married? 16 years. Well, everything looks like a failure halfway through, or everything stinks until it's finished. Neither of you are finished yet, right? So I've experienced that over and over again as I paint a picture. I'll look at a painting that I'm working on and I think, boy, I don't like that. It doesn't look good. It looks like a fail. Well, it's not done yet. See, that's a good indication that it's not done yet. So there's another quote, which is like in the middle of a surgery, it looks like there's been a murder in the room because there's blood everywhere, right? Well, by the time they're finished, it can be very successful. So I think that the halfway principle is important for entrepreneurs, founders to keep in mind. It's like, how many times you think about it, how many times think back. And it's like, when you've had a big success, think about a big success that you've had. What did it look like halfway through? Oh, you know what? Now that you mention it, it didn't look so good, right? So I think that if I'm doing something creative, Nathan, and it starts to look kind of messy, it looks like a failure, I could lose that creativity if I don't have the right focus or the right perspective and the right understanding. So if I just look at that and say, okay, great. Oh my gosh, it just means I'm making progress, right? So if I continue at it, in other words, don't give up on it. You continue at it. Boy, raising kids, I've raised 5 kids with my wife. We've been married 38 years. They're all adults now. You know, there's some rocky times raising kids. Sometimes you wonder, oh my gosh, this kind of looks like a failure in the middle, looks messy in the middle. And then they just raise up and they're just wonderful adults, human beings. So this principle can apply. And so from a perspective of being creative and overcoming maybe these blocks and so forth, it's like, I've got that perspective. Halfway through, it's going to look messy. And, you know, my first book, I published it, self-published it in 2008, Love and Grow Rich. Love and Grow Rich. The how to let's see, I'm trying to remember the subtitle because I'm confusing it with my new book, Love and Grow Rich. How to become rich in all aspects of your life, not just financially, right? But I published that 2008. You know, when I started writing that book, it was 1993. It took me 15 years to write that book. Now, why did it take so long? And there were times, Nathan, there's just a creativity block over and over and over again, right? Because I was more focused on perfection than I was on direction and progress. It's about progress, not perfection. So I was talking to a friend, it was 2008, I was talking to a friend of mine, a business associate in Florida, and he said, Timothy, publish the dang book, finish the dang book. Because every time I talked to him, I said, I haven't not done with it yet. And he said, put this in the introduction. He said, write this in the introduction. And I did. It's something like this. Let me tell you about my writing style. I'm no Shakespeare. I write like I speak. You're going to find some grammatical errors and this and that, but please overlook those and really take the message and implement the message into your life. As soon as I wrote that, it was like, okay, that gave me permission to not be perfect. I wish I had that conversation 14 years earlier because I would have published the book then. So what was it a lack of creativity for 15 years? Or was it just, I was looking for perfection as opposed to progress, direction instead of perfection? So it doesn't need to be perfect. I remember Dan Kennedy, who's one of my mentors in terms of marketing, he would say, I would rather be prolific than good. I would rather be prolific than good. Now, Dan Kennedy's really good. But in terms of marketing and other things and building your business, sometimes it's better to be done than it is to be perfect. So I hope there's some principles there, Nathan, that can help one to understand, okay, that will help me in terms of being more creative and to not getting these blocks if I just continue on with those attitudes.
I like what you've touched on earlier. You said, you know, the halfway theory. I really like that. And that's, you're going to come into precipices, right? Multiple times. You're going to come in those forks in the road, and you just got to look back and you've got to ask yourself, is this done? And if it's no, then, well, give yourself permission to continue forward. And I think that's very important for everyone out there, including myself. So thank you so much for pumping me up on this podcast. But, you know, I want to ask you a little bit more here as we close about your future and what you're excited about and the ways that you're developing yourself in a new chapter of life, because everyone has seasons. Seem like you have a lot of experience building businesses, creating relationships, doing all these things. But now we've got kids are out of the house. You've got this book that you just wrote. So what's next for Timothy Paulson?
That is a very, very good question. Now, about 3 years ago, some people say, well, that sounds a little strange, but 3 years ago, I was awakened from a dream. I don't remember what the dream was, but I remember very distinctly what the impression was. Get a Master of Divinity degree. Now, I didn't know what a Master of Divinity degree was. So it was like, wow, that came, it was like some sort of inspiration, right? So I went online, I said, what's a Master of Divinity? And I learned, it's what pastors, ministers, chaplains, their professional degree. And I didn't want to become a pastor, a minister, or chaplain. I'd been serving in my church as a bishop for years and didn't need to get a Master of Divinity for that. But I did it. I went to Liberty University in Virginia, got a Master of Divinity. And then after that, it was like, well, what's next? Well, I want to get a Doctor of Ministry degree. So I'm currently at Emory University, Candler School of Theology, working on a Doctor of Ministry. So Nathan, what my big interest is in starting a ministry. So even yesterday, you talk about taking action. Sometimes you just throw the paint out there, right? You just throw the paint out there so that there's no limits. Yesterday, I paid to form a nonprofit, Totality Ministries. So the timing is exactly right. So next year, I'm going to do more of a ministry focus. So my book, I can show it to you here. It's Totality-X. It's the art, let me go here, the art of becoming all God created you to be. This totality, or totality, the total eclipse is representative of, I love the symbol of you becoming all God created you to be in total, right? But it's a Christocentric book. It's very Christ-focused, but there's 15, 16, 18 different pictures, paintings that I've done. So I present a painting. I say, here's the painting, and then the background of the painting. And then I present the success principles because I look at art with the focus of, what are the success principles? What can I teach? How can I use these to teach business owners and others, founders, to become better entrepreneurs? So the painting, then the success principles, and then at the end of each chapter is how Christ is represented, how Christ can help us to implement those success principles and become all God created them to be. So my focus is really the ministry that I'm starting. It's not a church. It's not affiliated with any religious organization. It is just a ministry to help people become all God created them to be. And then some other things that I want to do, like uniting, more unity in the world, more love in the world, more friendship in the world, and more proper race relationships, getting rid of prejudice, stuff like that. Now, those are big moonshots, but I'm starting with helping you become all that God created you to be. And as you do that, I think we start to change the world. So I have my Paulson Creativity Studio where art is sold and other things are going on. Then I've got the ministry, which is helping people become all God created them to be. That's what's in my heart. And so that's what I'm moving forward with. And everything that we've been talking about, creativity, oh my goodness. When you take the Bible and you take spirituality, you take theology, you combine it with art, it opens up all sorts of opportunities for creativity. So I absolutely love that.
Well, I'm excited with you and also for you, Timothy, on this next chapter of life. And I actually heard once before, a gentleman spoke and he said, we're not supposed to just arrive safely at death. We are to to live all out. And it seems that, that's what you're doing right now. And you're really taking a stance and wanting to create a better world for yourself, but also for the people that are around you, because you have that big burden on your heart. So,
Yep.
well, I just want to say thank you. Mm-hmm.
Can I just add one thing before you end?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
That's a yes. Okay, good. I think it was, trying to remember his name. It'll come to me. He wrote the book, The Road Half Stupid. Oh, no. The Road Less Stupid. Keith Cunningham. Great book, by the way. The Road Less Stupid. But I heard him say, he quoted somebody from somewhere. It was like, hell on earth is coming to the end of your life and meeting the person you could have become. And it's like, I'm not buying that. What my goal is to help you become all God created you to be is at the end of your life, you meet the person you could have become, and you are exactly that person. That's heaven on earth. So that's my goal. That's my passion. It's like, what a horrible thought. It's like you don't become what you're capable of becoming, and that would be hell, and it probably would be. But man, think of how wonderful it's going to be. And that doesn't mean you're perfect. I don't think that God created you to be perfect, but to become all you're capable of becoming with all of our imperfections, all of our flaws. That's heaven on earth. So thank you for letting me add that.
Absolutely. Well, once again, thank you for the time that you spent with us today on the Founders Odyssey podcast, where we create an educational platform, inspiration, and community for you as a founder out there. If you like what you've heard today, subscribe and also share it with your friends. And until next time, stay tuned in.